Svayambhuvagyanathimiranthasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Yesterday morning, I gave advice for brahmacharis, and today I'm going to give advice for sannyasis. It's an auspicious day to do so. Actually, yesterday was the disappearance of Sri Madhvacharya. Just check that was the disappearance here. Those of you who have been in Udupi have seen his disappearance place, which is still there. And deity of him is there. And today is the disappearance celebration, at least these are according to our calendar, of Sri Ramanujacharya, who is known among his followers as Yatiraj or Yatindra, the king of sannyasis. So they both created many sannyasis as well as being themselves ideal sannyasis, and they're still sannyasis in their tradition, despite them both knowing the shastric injunction that sannyas is forbidden in Kali Yuga. So they didn't violate that, but they understood the spirit of that. So you may think, why am I giving advice to sannyasis here when there are no sannyasis here except myself? Well, everyone should be a sannyasi. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that anashrita karma palang karyang karma karote yaha sasanyasi cha yogi cha naniragniya na chakriya. That one who performs his duty and works as he is obligated without being attached to the result of it is an actual sannyasi and an actual yogi, and not one who formally accepts sannyas by giving up relationship with fire and not performing any standard Vedic karmas. That means kamya karmas, nitya karmas, kamya karmas, naimitic karmas. These are all for people in wanting to enjoy the results of their work. But a sannyasi gives them all up. So it's useful for, or should be useful for all devotees to hear this and understand this, to themselves aspire to that level, whether or not they at any point in time formally take sannyas is not important, but we should all aspire to the highest standard. Yesterday I was talking about being eternal idealists. So one whose life is dedicated to an ideal, he doesn't partake in the goings-on of this world, or doesn't partake as a participant, you could say. He's not part of the flow of the material world, but he partakes in the world to alter its course, or to lead people toward Krishna. So this advice, as it's being recorded, others may like to hear that, devotees who are thinking about taking sannyas, or those who have already taken sannyas. I can't jump the etiquette or by thinking that I'm qualified to advise the many sannyasis within our movement who are senior to me. But even though, I can't advise those, I can't offer advice to those who are senior to me, but there are an increasing number of sannyasis who are junior to me, and hopefully there will be many more sannyasis in our movement in future. So this should be beneficial for others to hear, and not only for sannyasis. The main topic that I'm going to discuss today is how to keep safe in sannyas, and it's a topic which is prominent at the moment as a sannyasi in our movement, who had been a sannyasi for many years, recently fell down or formally resigned from that position after being in the sannyas order for many years. This might seem to be the wrong query. That you might say, well, if someone's so wobbly and shaky that they're prone to fall down from sannyas, then they should have never taken it in the first place. That is a good objection. But on the other hand, it's understood that people take sannyas, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a pure devotee in all respects, or that they're beyond the clutches of Maya in all respects, but that they've taken a very serious stand to become free from the clutches of Maya, and to help others to become free from the clutches of Maya. It's not that Maya switches off when the sannyasi switches off from the when the sannyasi takes the formal vow, or when a man takes a formal vow of sannyas, it doesn't mean that Maya says, okay, well, it was nice knowing you and I won't be seeing you anymore. But rather she gets into full gear. They're the two potencies of Maya, avaranatmika vritti, by which she covers everyone. Then there is the prakshepatmika vritti, by which someone who's trying to get free from her, she kicks him back. The covering potency and the throwing potency. We see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he reached Puri, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he saw that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is in the highest ecstasy of love of Krishna. He recognized that according to the descriptions of the scriptures. But still Sarvabhauma thought, I have to teach him Vedanta because he's in a very dangerous position. He's young and very attractive. So how will he be able to maintain sannyas? Sarvabhauma thought like that. So then, of course, there's no question of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu falling from sannyas, and ontologically there's no question of him even taking sannyas, because he's always beyond the... To think of him as a sannyasi in the ordinary sense is a misunderstanding, because he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead beyond all material designations. So some devotees, they say, well, we should just stop giving sannyas altogether, but Prabhupada said sannyasis are required for preaching. There has to be visible spiritual leaders. Sannyas, within our movement, sannyas is meant for preaching. For if one has a mission within Prabhupada's mission to push on the Sankirtan movement within a given area, or within a given area of service, or within a geographical area, then taking sannyas means that. Well, that's the reason that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, the reason Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati took sannyas, and the reason that Prabhupada took sannyas, and the reason that Prabhupada gave sannyas is to so that people respect that, and that facilitates one's preaching. So the idea that we should just stop sannyas, that's not a very good idea. We should not be very liberal in giving sannyas. from what I can see, the sannyasis of ISKCON are in general better respected than those of the Gauriya Math, because in the Gauriya Math, anyone can just walk in and say, I want to take sannyas, and they'll give you on the spot, practically. Whereas in ISKCON, we are very strict about that, and so there is a difference, because people know that it can be a very junior devotee who's not very mature, who's given sannyas in Gauriya Math, but in ISKCON we don't give sannyas so very easily. The idea that only old men should take sannyas, well, in a way it's good. We see in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, that's the system. In the Madhva Sampradaya, it's just the opposite. They give only young boys sannyas. Whereas in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, they only give old men who are generally already married and their children are grown up and this and that. So there are pros and cons of both systems. The problem with giving old men sannyas is that the good thing about it is they're less likely to fall down. Generally speaking, we don't hear of sannyas fall downs in the Ramanuja Sampradaya. But on the other hand, their whole life energy is to a large extent expended. Actually, there's also this Chinnajaya Swami, and he's the most prominent Ramanuja sannyasi in Andhra Pradesh. By far the best known, but I don't think he was ever married. He's about the same age as me, and he took sannyas. I saw him many years ago. I'm not sure how many years ago. He was a sannyasi at that time, maybe 18 years ago, something like that, when I first saw him. So, but generally in the Ramanuja Sampradaya it's like that. But all men take sannyas. Well, in general, they may not have so much dynamism, and someone who could have been spreading Krishna consciousness throughout their life in that ashram, that opportunity is lost. And there are many sannyasis who have, despite the much publicized fall downs, there have been many sannyasis in our movement who took sannyas in a young age and have not only maintained it throughout their lives, but have substantially served the preaching movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by, you could say, utilizing that ashram. Utilizing means the respect and the facility they get, they've used that to push on the movement. It's required that there be visible, designated spiritual leaders who others can look up to, because most people don't have the spiritual sense to recognize who is actually spiritually advanced and who isn't. So of course there may be disadvantage of that also. Taking sannyas in one sense, or the very institution of sannyas as a preaching tool, you could say, preaching utility, it is a concession to people's stupidity. Because if people were intelligent enough, they would recognize who's spiritually advanced without there having to be any such designation, or who's a spiritual leader. But people are stupid, so it's for people who are pious and stupid. In the West, people don't care if I'm a sannyasi or renunciant. They don't care. It doesn't mean anything to them. But if you tell them that you're the head of an institution with many buildings and many followers, they may respect that. I remember there's one sannyasi, actually the one who's been in the news a lot recently, who, he's not in that ashram now, but he told me that once he came into Australia where he was the GBC, and the immigration staff, they were questioning him just before he took Australian citizenship. Why are you coming? What are you doing here? And they looked in his briefcase and saw he had all these papers showing the debts of the financial position of the different temples, and they saw New Govardhan farm debts of about $1 million, and then they were very impressed that he was a sannyasi. They weren't impressed at all, but that he was overseeing an organization which dealt in such big sums of money. So they said, well, how many of there in your position throughout the world? And he said, about 30. And then they were very respectful when they saw big money figures. But the fact that he was a sannyasi, a monk, they didn't care for it at all. But so they're visible spiritual leaders who others can look up to, but they have to be actually spiritual. There's no use in taking sannyas unless one is actually spiritual, spiritually interested. It's not just an institutional position. So what does spiritual mean? Well, the first thing that should be obvious for sannyasis is don't mix with women. Should be very obvious. Even if one is very spiritually advanced, it doesn't look good. Even if one is so spiritually advanced that one can mix with women, it doesn't look very good if a sannyasi has women following him around. There's one of my godbrothers astutely noted once that he sees two kinds of sannyasis. One is followed by women disciples. There's many women around. The other type has brahmachari disciples around him. So one may be very advanced, that one can engage all kinds of people, and it may be that women especially respect sannyasis because they know how powerful their own charms can be. But even if one is that advanced, it doesn't look proper for a sannyasi to, at least in India, it doesn't look proper for a sannyasi to be surrounded with women or to have women secretaries. And even if one is so advanced, one can engage them in various ways. You can become worn down by that contact. That doesn't mean one is hateful to women. My own personal approach is to be kind and respectful to women, but to advise them that they should be married, and then they should be their husband can look after all their problems, or if they have problems with their husband, then other grihastas can help them like this. Not that sannyasis are very much closely involved. Of course, some in the modern world, it's quite common that women are unmarried, they've been married, and then they're not married, and all such things. But still, it's better if they're overseen intimately seen by grihasta devotees. Not that one. And I see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu dealt with that also. You'll hardly find women mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita at all, apart from Shachi Mata. Prabhupada also, actually, when he was first in the West, his personal servant was Govinda Dasi, who was mostly with her husband. But then later, Prabhupada, he in the early days, there were so many, we can't judge the standards by the early days of ISKCON. Prabhupada was just getting the movement started somehow or other. with all kinds of strange things going on, but gradually he introduced standards, and later he traveled with a small group. It would be a servant, a secretary. Sometimes a female cook would travel with him. At Palika especially, she was married. Also, better for sannyasis not to get too much involved in the problems of householders. Even if the men are approaching them, this problem, that problem, better not to get too much involved. It's not really the duty of a sannyasi, and thinking about all these things, being involved in all these things, it tends to drag one's consciousness down. Again, let the householders look after that. Of course, if they don't do that, then, or if the grihastas don't trust anyone else, then it may come to the sannyasi. But again, I've seen devotees, sannyasis, they get involved, and these problems, they just go on and on and on, and it's all unsolvable to a large extent, unless devotees come to the higher platform of Krishna consciousness, which is sannyasi is supposed to show. Better also that not for a sannyasi, even not to be like hateful of grihastas, but also to keep association mostly with sannyasis and brahmacharis. Now, I don't keep that much association with sannyasis. Being here in India especially, there's, unless you're in the dhams, there's not, it's a huge country, a huge preaching field. We don't have that many sannyasis, and everyone's busy. So I myself am a bit weak in that association with other sannyasis, but it's better to live with brahmacharis, and even like this, like with young brahmacharis like yourselves, who are idealistic, fresh, pure, like that. Better to. Then the sannyasi can also keep their consciousness idealistic, fresh, and pure. It's better not to live with. Of course, one may stay in grihastas' homes when one is traveling and preaching, and be kind to them and this and that. You don't have to blast them out of but it's not good to stay for extended periods. It's against sannyas dharma to stay for extended periods in with grihastas, and it doesn't look good. It's not good for the consciousness of a sannyasi, even if grihastas are, willing to facilitate the sannyasi in that way. It's better he stays in an ashram with brahmacharis, or if traveling with brahmacharis. Traveling is very good. That's sannyas dharma, or staying in one place but not very luxuriously. An important point: don't keep money. People may like to give money to sannyasis because they think that it'll be well used in Krishna's service. Don't keep money. Don't build up a big bank balance. Temptation is always there. Plus, whatever money you get should be used for Krishna. Don't do business. It's not the dharma of a sannyasi to get involved in business. Prabhupada said our business is book business, so that money is meant for book distribution, printing books, organizing festivals, temples, building temples, all this kind of thing. So don't keep, of course, some personal, in the modern world it may be necessary to keep a little personal money for a sannyasi, for travel and maybe some medical expenses or whatever, but it's not good to build up a big personal bank balance. So I was saying about living with brahmacharis, young brahmacharis. Sannyasis are not meant to live like a king. They're called a Maharaj, but that's because that means like a king they're supposed to subdue, just like a king subdues the rogues in the state. So sannyasi should subdue the senses, which are attacking our spiritual consciousness. So it's known as the renounced order of life. So in the modern age, we don't try to have very severe austerities, but at the same time, a sannyasi should not be seen to be living very luxuriously. There may be some scope for that, in as much as, for preaching, just like Srila Prabhupada had first-class quarters, very aristocratic quarters in some of the temples. You can still see them. They're maintained like that. Prabhupada's rooms in Bombay, just outside London, Bhaktivedanta Manor in Melbourne, Los Angeles, you can see they're very nice rooms, so Prabhupada would. But he kept such facilities because practically every day, once they got for such facilities, the devotees, they would call important people to meet Prabhupada, just like professors, politicians, journalists, and such people would be happy to come to such a facility, and they would give importance to the person who was who was living in such a place, and Srila Prabhupada would take that opportunity to preach to important people. So it's not beyond the scope of sannyas to have nice quarters, but as a general rule, sannyasi should live very simply and not be attached to comfort and all this kind of thing. Sannyasi should remain strong in every way, spiritually strong, should have good sadhana, read the books, physically even, the health can be worn down by a lot of travel, a lot of engagements, a lot of late nights, a lot of stress. People often come to sannyasis and tell them all their problems, and management problems and this and that. So one has to remain physically fit also. In many places I see that the sannyasi goes there and they want to engage him every moment and arrange many programs, which is nice. And if a sannyasi has energy, he can do that. But you have to understand also that if it's like that in every place, then physically it can be a strain, and also you need time also for sadhana, chanting, reading, keeping up with email. You have to deal with so many things as it can pile up. I've seen sannyasis who are just collapsed after. It's just they're just given so much engagement without even sufficient time for resting that they literally collapse. I mean, just they can't move They just lie on the bed or the floor or whatever, and they can't. They have to cancel programs. So when they go to different places, it would be good that those who are arranging the schedule see that they sannyasis have needs also. They for some personal time for themselves, for reading and chanting and resting, like this. On the other hand, they shouldn't become lax. They shouldn't be under-engaged. They are, after all, spiritual leaders, so they should lead by preaching. So if shouldn't have so much time that they're just under-engaged. That they have to see to themselves, because generally no one is policing a sadhu, a sannyasi. As a junior devotee might be told, now you should do this, now you should do that. But they have a lot of independence, which it's to have a lot of independence is good if one can use it productively in Krishna's service. But if one just wastes his time by sleeping a lot, talking prajalpa, or wandering around on the internet or such things, well, that's obviously not suitable for a sannyasi. So that independence, with that independence, he can be good or it can be dangerous also, to have so much independence with no one telling him what to do. Well, you could just skip going to Mangalarati or attending temple programs or regular sadhana programs, and no one will say anything, and they may think, well, he's a sannyasi, that's okay. You have like somehow or other that's considered something of an excuse that you can just not do that. But then you will suffer, and others will suffer also by not having the association that a sannyasi is supposed to give, and by that example that he sets, it's by not going to Mangalarati, he's indirectly saying, well, it's not very important. So don't misuse that independence. Don't be too independent. Don't travel alone. It can be very dangerous. But if you travel alone, then you're in the company of your own mind, and if you're not fully Krishna conscious, it can be very dangerous. Of course, sometimes, especially when I fly, I usually go alone. But there's always someone to meet me at the other end, so I can't get into too much trouble. So devotees should know also where the sannyasi is. That too much independence can be very dangerous. Be careful. So don't be too lax, and don't work yourself into stress or emotional exhaustion. Keep a balance. Don't get worn down by management. Many sannyasis are deeply involved in management, which is unfortunate in many ways, because so much of their energy goes in managing when they could be more engaged in the core activities of Krishna consciousness, of hearing and chanting and preaching. Of course, management is inevitable because sannyasi is supposed to be preachers, so Srila Prabhupada said that management follows preaching like a shadow, but better not get bogged down or worn down by management. Inevitably there's some conflicts in management which can breed resentment, partisan feelings, and so on. Not very healthy emotions, or to get so much travel with which affects one's sadhana, not only one's health, but when you travel, often the sadhana is affected. So keep a balance. Don't push yourself too hard, and also don't be too loose and lax. Always there should be some creative spiritual challenge. That means there should be some in preaching, some field to develop, either some geographical area, just like we may look on the map and see, oh, there's no preaching going on in this place or that place, let's develop this area, or in some area in the sense of some field of preaching, just like, who's preaching to the Muslims in India, for instance? You might take that as a field. What about preaching to the Dalits? We don't have any program for so like that. There's some field or some spiritual challenge, something to do, something to develop in Krishna's service that will help to keep us enlivened. Otherwise, if it becomes kind of routine, you just go to the same temples and it's the same, there's not much expansion. You're just kind of like overseeing everything but there's no real thrust for expansion and development and improvement, then it can become kind of boring. So the sannyasi has to be an idealist, an eternal idealist, and should not. Sannyas doesn't mean retirement, but it means to go to the front of the battle. So if you're thinking that sannyas is retirement, or if it somehow or other comes to that, then don't retire. Just like you may oversee the development of the movement in some area, and then other junior devotees come up, they become capable, they can oversee it, and the sannyasi may, so to speak, work himself out of a job. He's not required to oversee. There are others oversee. Okay, now you have to see, now it's time to do something else, to take up some other challenge in Prabhupada's service. So be a Maharaj by fighting Maya. Fight with Maya. Stick to Prabhupada's ideal, how Prabhupada said that I want to fight for Krishna out to my last breath like Arjuna. Prabhupada is our ideal. We have so many ideal sannyasis to follow. As I was saying, Madhvacharya, Ramanuja. Srila Prabhupada is a perfect example in the modern age. Don't deviate from Prabhupada. The sannyasi has tremendous potential to lead others and to mislead. So stick very faithfully to Prabhupada. Don't mix up Krishna consciousness with mundane activities, mayavad, sahajarism. Just stick to what Prabhupada gave us, and stick with sannyas also. Whatever happens, just stick. Once you take that decision, there should be no going back. One of my godbrothers who's passed away now, he told me, and he told others also. He told me personally. Someone else told me that he had told him that also. He said that actually, probably I should have been a grihasta, but Prabhupada gave me sannyas and I want to stick with it throughout my life. And he did. So all glories to him for that. So stick with it, whatever. Keep your stick. Otherwise, what's the alternative? Fill up the Triveni with dead bodies or what? That was a good rule. That sannyasi who falls down should drown himself with Triveni. I mean, the point, not that actually should be done. Prabhupada didn't encourage that, but that should be one's determination. That stick to sannyas or die. The sannyasi already committed spiritual suicide. Sorry, not spirit. Sorry, that's for the Mayavadis. Spiritual suicide, civil suicide. They no longer have any mundane designations or any mundane relationships. So, if they die from sannyas, then what do they become? Something like a ghost or something like that. Of course, there have been several devotees in our movement who they were sannyasis. They fell from that position, and they've gone on with service very honorably in the sense of their service, but at the same time it's not so relishable to remember that they did fall from sannyas. Or I guess that's another point, that don't take sannyas prematurely and don't be pushed into it, or just because people expect you to do it. If Prabhupada said that, it's there in the Bhagavatam, one of his purports, Srila Prabhupada said that one should be confident of at least being able to control the gross sexual urge. So if you're not sure, then don't do it. Better. Not sure, I mean no one can be fully sure because Maya is so strong. But one should be confident that if I take shelter, if I go on with this process, Krishna, Prabhupada, Guru will help. Be ideal. Should know that once you take sannyas, everyone's looking at you. And as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Sannyasyara alpa chidra sharba loke gai. Any slight discrepancy from the proper standard by a sannyasi, everyone will point it out. People look up to sannyasis as being ideal, and they respect them for that, but if they're not ideal, they don't like it at all. Some years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, there was one Keshavananda, his name was, in Dwaraka, I think he was, out in Saurashtra, Jamnagar. And he was very respected by the local people. He had some ashram for young girls or something, and then it was found out that he was just using the girls. And so they dragged him in the streets naked and beat him, and he was so much respected. But then when they found out that he was not at all what they thought he was, they were so disgusted with him. So be ideal, control eating, sleeping, be shastric. People should be absorbed in Shastra, knowledgeable of Shastra, because people will ask questions of, and expect sannyasis to be able to give answers on Shastric topics. So it's not just, being like some kind of father figure and patting babies on their head, and that's all part of it, but really one should be absorbed in Shastra and getting always deeper in Shastric knowledge. So these are some... one other point here, that it's much more conducive for sannyas to be in India than to be in other countries. In the West, it's more difficult in many ways because there's no proper consideration of the sannyas ashram or what it means to be a monk. A few people have some idea. Last year in America, there was some security check in some airport, and on one side there was a woman, the other side was a man. So I went towards the side with the man, and the woman said something. I can understand you're a monk. You won't want to come this side. She was respectful. She wasn't saying in a sarcastic way. And in Russia there was a security check, and there was only women. And she just came up to me, women checking men, and I just stood back. And then I had to wait for like 20 minutes before they understood. She understood that I didn't want to be checked by a woman, but so they arranged. I had to wait 20 minutes for a 20-second pat down, but I wasn't in. I had time, so I thought it was better. And that's another thing. Is as far as possible. It's not possible all the time, but sannyasi should always travel in devotee clothes. Some countries, just like I go to some countries where if I was to go in devotee clothes, they wouldn't let me in. So sometimes you have to, it may be necessary, but as far as possible, always be in devotee clothes. That will help to protect one. Yeah, I was saying India is more favorable, so it's good also for sannyasis who are in the West to spend some time in India, in the dhams, and even not only in the dhams, but even traveling and preaching and experiencing the culture here. Especially, they could go to the holy places, and in many holy places, the devotees are very well received and respected, and you can see how the culture should be and what it means to be a sannyasi. Actually, in some countries, even better they respect than India. In Sri Lanka, they're very respectful to monks. Did you go there, or you heard from devotees? Heard from devotees. They're very, very respectful. So that's general advice. Some devotees who have been strong sannyasis for many years, they don't follow all the things that I said in here. So it's not that all of these rules or all of these suggestions they apply to everyone. Some of our sannyasis, they thrive on management. They love it. They're really into it. They just push and push and push themselves, and they just keep on going, and they just have a lot of internal enthusiasm. Generally, we see those devotees who are more into management. Again, this is a general statement. They're not so much philosophical or into Shastra, because it takes time you need to spend time regularly studying to be philosophical, generally speaking, and to be absorbed in Shastra. Some of our leaders, they're very strong on doing a lot of outside preaching, and they're high in preaching and low in sadhana. So it's not stereotype, but these are some general points. So Hare Krishna. Any questions? If a new devotee has a Krishna conscious attitude, will the progress of a neophyte devotee be like that of a sannyasi? Well, generally neophytes make progress quicker than it seems, because you quickly come up to you quickly learn many things and incorporate them into one's life. So newcomers, they generally make the quickest progress. Srila Prabhupada wrote that advancement in Krishna consciousness depends on the attitude of the devotee. So, neophyte or old-timer, it's the attitude. The attitude of submission, of service, of wanting to be Krishna conscious without any personal desires. This kind of attitude will help one. People are foolish, yeah. were there sannyasis in other yugas? There were, yes, but as an ashram of renunciation, of leaving the world, than for preaching. Preaching on a wide scale seems to be particularly prominent in Kali Yuga. So sannyas for preaching seems to be for Kali Yuga. Otherwise sannyas was there in other yugas, but maybe not for preaching. And often also it may be in many cases that people they became renunciants without any formal ceremony or induction into it. They just leave and go away like that. So it's not that preaching wasn't there. Narad has been preaching all over the universe since the beginning of time, or before time. In Satya Yuga also we see that he preached to Dhruv Maharaj and Prachina Barhi and all these. This is way back in. So, but there's no record of him also officially taking sannyas. He's not known as Narad Swami. So, sannyas as an institution. Well, it's an order within the varnashram which is meant for detachment from the world, so that one can become spiritually advanced. It seems to be in previous times to be more or less just for one's own. It's an individual activity, whereas sannyas as a preaching function was maybe the first sannyasi preacher in Kali Yuga was Shankara, and he made. Or even before that, Buddha, although he, again, not officially said, he's sort of the order of bhikshuks. So he was a preacher, and he then in Buddhism there were mats, and then Shankara started mats also, following the Buddhists. And then also Ramanuja and Madhva, they made mats. So you could say that sannyas for preaching maybe. I haven't studied the history very deeply. I probably should do, but it would seem that sannyas as an order for preaching probably evolved from Buddha, Shankara, and then Ramanuja, Madhva, and then in the Gauriya Sampradaya with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. It was there in the Vishnu Swami Sampradaya also, which is in the modern age is represented by the Vallabh Sampradaya. There's no sannyas in the Vallabh Sampradaya. Nimbaka, I'm not sure if they have sannyasis. They have mahants. I'm not sure, I haven't studied them much. They're not so prominent. Haven't studied them much means I haven't studied them at all. Anything else? I said that Ramanuja and Madhva, they knew the injunction of Shastra that there's sannyas forbidden in Kali Yuga. Still, they themselves accepted sannyas and gave sannyas. I didn't say they didn't care for that instruction, but they understood the spirit of it. That's the kind of sannyas that was instituted by Indra at the attempted 100th horse sacrifice of Prithu Maharaj. That kind of sannyas, Kapalik sannyas, or the tantric sannyasis, they take the skull and all this kind of sannyas, or Mayavadi sannyas. That's not wanted, but sannyas for full service of Krishna. That is function of the soul, that is not a material function. It's more than a function of varnashram. It's a fully spiritual function to fully engage oneself. Kaya mana vakya, body, mind and words, and soul. So there you have the three dandas, makes the tridanda, and one more to signify the soul, the Atma. So Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to all the Tridandi Sannyasis. There's a beautiful saying, this Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, may the Tridandi, he gave a lot of importance to his Tridandis, but I can't. May the Tridandi